It's been a couple of months since this phenomenon occurred. I also feel like I've bottled up too many emotions, as nobody would believe me. At least until I found you guys. So, here goes the story of the incident where I met this entity. One day, I went out to the balcony to sweep, as I usually do. I finished my work and took an afternoon siesta. After I woke up, I found a bronze statue, heavily oxidized, in a puddle of blood. I guess now was the time to give some context. I served in the armed forces, therefore I wasn't really afraid of blood, as I'd seen my fair share of blood and death. I picked up the statue to inspect it. It had a gash on its right wrist, and it was bleeding profusely. Now this freaked me out a little. I never expected any supernatural events to happen to me. I was always skeptical of my family's classic ghost stories. Yet, my years of physical and psychological training kicked in. Statue was about 12 inches tall, featured a woman wearing a robe and holding a paper fan, staring at a noose in front of her. I took the statue and put it in the sink. My analytical mind kicked in. I collected some of the blood for further analysis. I cleaned up the puddle and the trail of blood. Last thing I want is to be landed as a murderer by the Karen next door. I then took a bath and had a change of clothes. I also wondered how the statue had gotten there. Naturally, I checked the CCTV footage. What I saw shook me to my core. I got goosebumps and sweaty hands just looking at the footage. A crow, jet black in color, with red glowing eyes, swooped in from seemingly nowhere, dropped the statue, and flew away. It easily seemed to be able to carry the moderately heavy thing. Its movements were smooth, like a knife through butter. Its eyes, though, those eyes were glowing red. They sent shivers down my spine. They seemed to dissect me and draw me into an inescapable void. They betrayed an air of superior intelligence, yet seemed to be pleading in a way, pleading to help and take it seriously, like a trapped soul. I had to get it out of my head. I took a deep breath and decided that the next best course of action would be to call an archaeologist, or at least an art curator. I decided to check my contact list. I couldn't find an archaeologist, but I did miraculously find an art curator, a former friend of mine at university. I called her and asked her to come to my house immediately. She lived about 2 hours away. I promised her I'd make it worth her time. She told me she'd arrive the next day, it already being late. I decided to take dinner and fall asleep. I woke up to a pecking and cawing in the middle of the night. It appeared Mr. Crow had come to remind me to take this seriously. Well, that's exactly what I was doing, though for my sake, not for its. Yet, it didn't try to enter the house or hurt me or anything. This event seemed to give me purpose in life. The endless days of drinking alone at home, sleeping during the day, drinking again, not to mention the numerous suicide attempts, had taken a toll on my body. I lived to die. I had no one, no lovers, no family, scarce few friends. The next day at about 11, I could hear the honk of Stephanie's car. She was wearing a designer dress and bag, and here I was in my sweatpants. I took her to the kitchen. I think she was expecting to see art or valuable artifacts, not a horrific old statue. She gasped and almost fainted at the stream of blood in the sink. I put her on the couch and asked her to take a deep breath. I plucked some chamomile and crushed them. I find that the smell of chamomile calms me down, and it seemed to allay some of her fears. I asked her if she had a solution to my problem. Still in shock, she replied with a hushed voice, "No." She promised not to tell a soul and promptly left, not even asking for the fee. I guess regular people are afraid of blood to an extent, and it appears that the alcohol numbs my nerves as well. The only remaining answer was to take the blood to a forensic analyst, hoping that it was human and that they could recognize the DNA. I called one of my acquaintances from the Army, who now works as an analyst. He asked me to meet him at 4 in the evening. I said that sounded fine. The next week breezed by. That is, until the day I got the results. The blood was that of Miss Mizoom, who was found murdered at her home 2 years back. The killer was never found. I had to bribe my friend to keep his mouth shut so I didn't end up in a police interrogation room. I assessed the public records relating to her case. Her body was found in a state of advanced decomposition, despite being killed only a day prior. She had acid burns and bite marks all over her body. Her house, and especially the attic, was completely trashed. I took a cursory review of her family history. Her elder sister was found dead in her room 2 years later, 4 months back. She'd committed suicide by slashing her wrist. What's more, she was found with the statue in her room. Though, why was the younger sister's blood flowing from the statue when the older was found with it? It seemed that the deaths were connected somehow. The older sister's death seemed natural as suicide could be, and that's why I'm in front of her uncle's house, uninvited, like a burglar. I'm glad he didn't just shoot me on sight. Her uncle was an old man in his 60s. He didn't seem too happy, but he politely invited me in. He gestured for me to have a seat on the sofa and got me a cup of matcha. I introduced myself as an art curator who came into possession of a bronze statue. He almost spat at me in disgust. "So you make your living selling dead people's artifacts?" I shrunk back, but calmly, as I replied, "No, I came into possession of it through an agent. I didn't know it belonged to a deceased person, till today." I continued, "I wanted to pay my respects. I was sorry for your loss." He seemed a bit more pleased and replied, "Her grave is in the Shinto shrine." I nodded my head in acceptance. I asked, "If it's okay to share, may I know why she did such a thing?" He was taken aback. He replied, "Thank you for your concern. Not even her own family demonstrated that. Kiyomori was quite attached to her younger sister. Actually, now that I think about it, she probably had an unhealthy obsession with her sister. She paid for her college tuition, funded her hobbies, advised her, and followed her everywhere, if possible, despite being a responsible adult. The only obsession she had other than her sister was the statue you talked about. The statue was that of my aunt, Kia, Mori's grandmother. She chose to end her life the same way, just like Kiyomori did." Why did she commit suicide?" I asked. "You're obviously a curious person. I'll humor you. My aunt was forcibly married to a corrupt administrator. When she threatened to demask him, he turned public opinion against her and managed to get her arrested for adultery. She was sentenced to be hanged, but cut herself a day before. Her only choice was the noose or the blade. The statue was a commemoration of her honesty." I thanked him and walked to the front door, absent-minded, trying to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. As I walked out, I sensed a tingling on the back of my spine. I turned my back to see a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at me. It suddenly skittered away, with its body not to be seen. I'm not proud of what I did next. I ran through the street as fast as I could and reached home in record time. I opened a can of beer and turned on the TV. I doubted the soundness of my mind, and I thought my eyes were maybe playing tricks on me. Yet it had to be true. After all, I was sober back then, and my eyesight did save me back in Afghanistan. Also, in no way am I going to get killed like another horror movie protagonist. I don't think I'll knock on doors or investigate directly. I loaded my concealed Remington and disabled the safety. I'm going to sleep with it every day. After high school, having no better ideas, I joined the Navy SEALs. I never really liked any of it, but it was a job, after all. I love the guns, the airplanes, the grenades, but having to run all the time while some scumbag with a chip on his shoulder yells in your face isn't my idea of fun. Things got a lot more interesting after my term of service ended. I still had a high security clearance, so I used it to take temporary jobs as a mercenary, hired gun. I did some stints in Iraq with Blackwater, where they sent me out in the middle of the desert. A watchtower, an oil refinery looming over the burning sands. Along with a few other guys, they told us, guard the area with your life. While better than the SEALs, working for Blackwater was extremely boring. The other mercenaries and I would mostly just chain smoke cigarettes and drink coffee all night, staring out across the dead, empty desert. Over time, I worked my way up. Things started to get more interesting when a job offer arrived in my email one afternoon. This is what it said. Mr. Chase, I am the head of security for a private group of entrepreneurs and investors. Through some mutual contacts, I've heard of your professionalism and experience. We're currently putting together a small crew of guards for a private event on Redacted Island out in the Pacific Ocean that will run from January 9th to January 27th. Would you be interested in this job? The pay rate is $900 a day. Once you're on the island, it will be impossible to leave until the period of employment has ended. If you're interested, please respond to this email as soon as possible. Sincerely, Mario Antonin, Head of Security. I'd worked jobs like this from time to time, but none of them were paying that well. At most, I would usually get $350 to $500 a day, which was still good money when I was working 7 days a week, till the job finished. I instantly responded and said yes, I was interested. In response, they sent me a non-disclosure agreement that was the size of a small novel. That was how I found myself on a private jet, flying out to an island in the middle of the vast blue sea. I was never told the coordinates of the island, or saw it on a map. It was all kept very secret. A few hours later, we landed on a private airstrip. I looked out the window of the jet, seeing the tropical waters of the Pacific Ocean stretching off to the horizon in every direction. Below me stood an island with palm trees and sandy white beaches. An enormous Victorian mansion loomed directly in the center of it all. The mansion was painted black and looked like something straight out of a horror movie. It had no windows, and the turrets spiraled up into blade-like points. That was my first inkling that something might not be quite right about this trip. As the stairs to the private jet descended, I looked out on this strange new world. Employees waited to greet us, looking like beaten dogs. Some had their heads down, their eyes blankly scanning the ground. Most of them were women wearing red dresses, reminding me of stewardesses on the plane. The jet strip was surrounded by palm trees and tropical brush. The chirping of insects sounded all around us, high and resonant. I saw a strange patch engraved on all the employees' uniforms. It looked like a stick figure drawing of a man, the bottom of his body ending in a C. Its arms were long and jointed, almost spidery. 3 symbols, like repeating iron crosses, connected the left side of the body and the line. I wondered if it was the logo of some company. I put it out of my mind for now, but I'd see that symbol again all over the island, painted on the side of the mansion, and even cut into the trees with a knife. It would only be later that night that I realized its connection to Moloch. "Good day, sir, and welcome to the island," the server on my left said, with glassy eyes and a fake smile. They all looked up at once, but it was like the workers all looked through me rather than at me. Their eyes looked flat and dead, like painted on doll's eyes. "The island, huh? They wouldn't tell us where we were going. They said it was a secret. Is that what you call it?" The woman just nodded, the doll-like smile never leaving her face. "Officially, this island is unnamed and uninhabited," the woman said. "In fact, all traces of it have been scrubbed from the internet. You won't find it on Google Maps or any other publicly available satellite imagery." She leaned forward towards me with heavily mascaraed eyes and ruby red lipstick splashed across her lips. "This is a very special place. Only very special people are allowed here. We should be honored to work here under our Savior." "I hope you're talking about Jesus or something," I said jokingly. She just smiled blankly and motioned me forward. "Just follow the trail for a few 100 feet," she said, pointing at an opening in the palm trees where logs were laid down horizontally over the muggy jungle, "and you'll find the mansion. Good luck." I thought it was somewhat of a strange thing to say, wishing a random stranger luck. By the end of the night, I realized that simply to make it off the island alive, I might need that luck. I followed the woman's directions to the back of a brutalist mansion. A heavy metal door stood there with a small bulletproof window atop it. A tan Spanish face glowered out at me, then rapidly drew back and disappeared. A few heartbeats later, the door slid to the side on a gliding of hidden gears. The head of security at the island was a heavily tattooed ex-Marine named Mario. He wore a dark Kevlar vest over his black outfit, making him look like a walking shadow. I found the security had their own private complex in the mansion as he showed me around the site. Hundreds of hidden cameras covered every angle of the mansion and the surrounding parts of the island, too. Dozens of black-clad security agents swarmed over the screens, checking monitors and computers constantly. "Quite a setup you've got here," I said to Mario, nodding at him. He smacked me on the shoulder, giving me a confident grin. "Money's no issue here, Richard. Security is paramount. There are things on this island that could rip apart the world if ever they escaped." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what? Nuclear weapons or something?" I asked, with a laugh. "You'll see for yourself later," he said, his dark eyes flashing with something cold and alien. Mario led me in a couple of the new hired guns around the island. The place was certainly strange. It reminded me of some combination of secret black ops site and a playboy billionaire's private heaven. All the doors in the mansion looked like they were made of thick steel. They had wheels that would spin, like those on a submarine. The mansion also had no windows at all, at least none that I could see, except for the small shatterproof glass openings on the steel doors. I didn't want to ask too many questions, however. Couldn't resist asking him a couple of small things, though. At least, they seemed small to me. "What are those hatchways?" I asked Mario, pointing to the rectangular covers built into the concrete walkways. They had heavy handles. Are those manholes or something? "They're tunnels under the island, just for maintenance and security, you understand." "Wow, this place is certainly well developed," I said. We came out through a grove of palm trees. A stone walkway led down a white beach. Dozens of yachts were moored all across the shore, some of them looking like they must have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. "There's a lot of money and power here. That's why it's important you never talk about what you see here. There are people who control the world, the ones beyond the government and the media, not the elected officials who people see, but the actual power." "Like who? You mean the Rothschilds or the Soreses?" I laughed again, a sarcastic grinding laugh that grated my nerves. "Trust me, the truly powerful ones don't even have public personas. If you know their names, then they're just one of the puppets." I just shook my head at that, and then asked the real question that had been bothering me since I arrived. "Who's the Savior?" I asked. "Is that some code name or something?" Mario froze in place. "He's the one who runs everything here," he whispered conspiratorially, looking around nervously. "But don't be mentioning that kind of shit here. You'll probably see him tonight anyway. He's the one who runs the show. He'll be on the stage in his normal outfit." By the end of the day, I was suited up like the rest of the security staff, wearing the pure black pants and shirt with the symbol of Moloch engraved over the heart. Hundreds of the world's most famous politicians, actors, businessmen, artists had gathered, streaming in the front gate with a lot of soft, quiet chatter. I stood by the open doorway of a side exit with my AR-15 and body armor next to one of the other soldiers. They had also given me a sidearm. Every entrance or exit was manned by at least 2 armed men. The security at this place was some of the most intense I'd ever seen. Beyond the door, there were rows after rows of the most comfortable seats, all gathered in a semicircle around a massive stage made of pure mahogany. Blood-red curtains stood closed in front of the room, concealing their secret, for now at least. I heard the elites inside calling out their praise for Satan. I didn't want to look at the rows of high-ranking politicians, celebrities, influencers, and what have you, but my curiosity was high. I peeked around the corner of the stone archway, seeing the red curtains on the stage drawing apart. I saw one of my favorite actors standing in the front row, clapping excitedly and jumping up and down. The crowd cheered as a naked female strapped to an obsidian altar lay there. She was beautiful, blonde, probably no older than 20, with the face of a supermodel. Her mouth was gagged, her arms outstretched like Jesus on the cross. Thin leather cords were tied around her wrists and ankles, biting deeply into the skin. Her eyes rolled wildly as she shook her head from side to side. She froze as her eyes met mine for a brief moment. I saw the pleading expression there, the mortal terror, the absolute horror. A man in a goat mask wearing black robes slunk out from the side of the stage, carrying a wavy silver dagger engraved with strange symbols. The crowd erupted into a primal roar of pleasure and excitement that sounded like it came from a monstrous mouth. "Worthy is the Lamb," the man in the goat mask screamed with electric amplification. He had a deep voice, as if he had rocks rolling around in his throat. The crowd roared and clapped. Scattered cries of "Hail Lucifer" and "Ah, Satan" echoed from the massive auditorium. "Hey, pay attention," the other security agent said at my side with a thick Finnish accent. He was a tall Scandinavian guy named Kolmek. "You're not getting paid to watch the show, new guy." I tried to rip my gaze away from the stage, but it held my attention with the obsessive horror. "The burnt bones of children and women have been offered to the Ancient Ones, to Moloch," the man on the stage said. "Under our feet, the burnt bodies of hundreds lay dreaming. This victim will be the 666th. Her body will bring about the genesis we seek, the direct experience of the divine held by the gods, by Lucifer and Moloch and Baal." The roaring of the crowd temporarily drowned out the electrified magnification of his voice. "Tonight, we will rip open the veil." I had stopped watching the show, instead staring blankly out at the beach and the palm trees. At that moment, another black-clad security agent came up to my partner, whispering something in his ear, then immediately disappeared, heading off back in the direction of the main security office. Kolomek shook his head grimly. "I'll be right back," he said. "Stay right here. Don't move from this door no matter what. And pay attention." I nodded and watched as he walked off in the same direction. I immediately took the opportunity to continue watching the ceremony. I'd missed something important, apparently. The woman now lay dead on the sacrificial table, a gaping hole in her chest. Blood spurted from the crater as the man in the goat mask held her beating heart grasped tightly in his hands, letting the blood stream down his naked fingers. The crowd cheered with a rising bloodlust and insanity. Most of them were standing, their eyes gleaming and wide with fanatical adoration. The entire spectacle reminded me of some kind of ancient Aztec ritual. As the woman's sightless eyes stared vacantly up in death, the man in the goat mask pulled out a can of gasoline. The clear liquid gurgled as he upended the canister over her pale, bloodless face, over her naked stomach and long legs. A moment later, he lit a match and dropped it. I heard the whooshing of the flames as they rose up. The crowd went deathly silent as they watched the rippling flames. The man in the goat mask began chanting in some strange language I had never heard before. Sounded Semitic, but I knew it wasn't Arabic or Hebrew. I felt something like electricity ripple through the air, almost like a feeling of falling pressure before a storm. I looked down at the hairs on my arms, seeing them rise up. I looked back up at the stage, and my eyes widened in horror. The flaming body of the sacrificial victim had started to morph before my eyes and the eyes of the crowd around me. The dripping, blackening flesh jumped up and down, as if there were rats trapped in her body trying to escape. There was a deafening hissing, as if 1,000 snakes were being burned alive. The dead woman's arms jerked up, the skin splitting open as if she had seams running along her skin. Something dark and muscular with curving black talons ripped its way out of the dead, burning flesh. Behind it, a head appeared with long, curving horns and eyes that spun with whirls of fire. It looked like the offspring of a bull and a demon. Its imposing body rose from the inferno, appearing like magic from the solid stone. It raised itself to its full height, looming over the crowd, the last of the woman's blood hissing and boiling away as her flesh dissolved into ashes. "Behold, Moloch rises!" the man in the goat mask screamed in fanatical joy. The crowd cheering had stopped, though. Many of the faces in the crowd looked chalk white with terror. A bull god surveyed the crowd, its horns nearly scraping the ceiling 20 feet above the stage. At that moment, I knew death was on its way, with eyes of fire and a grin like a skull, ready to reap the field of human bodies. I heard running behind me, but I didn't dare turn away from the horrific sight. The last of the fire's embers died, sending up thin wisps of gray smoke that spiraled around the bull god's monstrous face. Moloch stood as still as a statue. If it weren't for one thing, I might have thought it was some sort of sculpture or an art project. He had 2 nostrils like a serpent's. As his great lungs inhaled, the smoke billowed in and out of his mouth and nose. Some of the people at the edge of the crowd had gotten up, hurrying towards the door. Moloch's head ratcheted to face them, his fiery eyes narrowing into slits. "Do not leave," the man in the goat mask pleaded. "Those who have fear are not worthy of life. Do not prove yourselves unworthy of life." As the first of the fleeing men and women got to within a few steps of the door, Moloch gave a primal roar. In a blur of strength, he reached down and ripped the blackened sacrificial altar off the stage. It ripped from the wood with a tremendous crack, like a bullwhip. He hurled the heavy mass of stone at those heading towards the opposite exit, the one I was guarding. I watched it curve through the air. The people started screaming and clawing to escape as it smashed down on their heads with a grating crash. I could feel the floor shake from where I stood outside. Blood exploded from their smashed bodies. I saw arms and legs jerking and seizing under the heavy stone, but within a few moments they slowed and stopped. Others were running towards the exit, but Moloch leapt off the stage in a blur. In a few bounding steps, he reached the pale, terrified faces on the outside of the threshold. His massive clawed hands came down. I heard bones shatter as blood sprayed my face on the wall. Bone splinters and pieces of brain exploded from the screaming bodies. I backpedaled, wiping my eyes, trying to get the blood off so I could see. No one had told me what to do in this situation. I didn't know if I was supposed to shoot that massive thing or if this was all just part of the show. "Richard," a familiar voice cried from behind me. Panic oozed from every word. I spun, seeing Mario and Kolomek standing side by side, their pupils dilated and their expressions grim. "We have a major problem." "I know," I said, holding my rifle tightly. I pointed behind me at the scene of rampant death and destruction. I'd seen bloodshed and war before, but this was different. The island itself seemed to feel it. The wind, which had been calm when I first arrived, now whipped the island in a fast circular motion. The breezes smelled of burnt matches and coppery blood. The static electricity, which had caused the hairs on my arm to rise, rippled over everything, with tiny blue flashes, increased in power by the second. "No, not Moloch," Kalak said, looking calmer than I felt. "The Savior lets Moloch thin the herd every year. It's Leviathan, the beast from the water. It smells the blood and is drawn from the depths of the ocean. We picked up the first blips on the radar a few minutes ago. When it gets here, it won't stop until everything is rubble. It'll kill everyone on the island. All security personnel must report to the South Beach immediately, a cool robotic voice cried out over hidden loudspeakers all over the island. The screaming from the auditorium had quieted behind me. I was afraid to look inside. There it is, Calmac said, his head jerking up as the emergency alert sounded. It's time to fight, he said, motioning me to follow. We sprinted over curving trails of smooth logs between deadly quiet forests. All the insects and birds had gone silent. Ahead of us, the palm trees opened up onto the Pacific Ocean, but it was no longer a beautiful tropic blue. A black, swirling whirlpool like an ulcerous wound had opened up on its surface. It stretched hundreds of feet across, drawing closer to the shore by the second. Dead fish, sharks, dolphins, squids, even whales spun in the filthy dark water. 20 black-clad security agents waited for the three of us on the beach, their eyes wide, their faces pale with terror. Like myself, they all had AR-15s and Glocks with extra magazines for both. I guess the Glocks might be useful for blowing my brains out if it was a last resort over being eaten by some hell beast, but I didn't think it would stop anything from another dimension. The clouds swirled overhead in a thick curtain as black as smoke. Flashes of blue lightning detonated every couple of seconds. Mario raised his hand, screaming over the roaring of the wind. Kalamek stood by my side, his face grim and his eyes narrowed. Your job is to fight off anything that tries to get on the island, Mario said, looking from one face to another with rapt attention. Nothing can stand against high-caliber rifle fire. Shoot at the face and eyes when it comes up. We've dealt with creatures like this before, and they will retreat if you injure them badly enough. I had the sense of being fed a line of bullshit as my mind processed this. What exactly is coming up? One of the doe-eyed security men asked. He barely looked old enough to drink, a young, muscular hulk with a Marine Corps tattoo on his neck. It is called Leviathan. Sometimes the ritual here and the smell of blood can draw strange things. Leviathan is one of those. We have encountered it before. Most important thing to remember is... His voice was suddenly drowned out by the terrible cacophony that came from the center of the whirlpool. A screech like the detonation of a nuclear missile shook the ground. The ocean jumped and bubbled frantically. The beach heaved and creaked, the white sand disappearing in fissures that opened up like greedy mouths underneath my feet. I lost my balance, falling forwards. The screeching continued, rising into a primal roar. A green dragon head, the color of an infected wound, erupted from the surface of the thrashing water, rising up dozens of feet in the air. It had two enormous slitted eyes that dilated and constricted quickly, as if glowering down at us. The screeching abruptly stopped, the pointed mouth of the dragon slamming shut with a sound like a gunshot. Within moments, another cancerous green head shot up in a blur, its skin looking as hard as stone. Ridges that looked as sharp as swords ran the length of its reptilian skull, arcing over its eyes and pointed snout. More heads erupted from the ocean, until all 7 of Leviathan's heads loomed over us. Not one of us fired. Not one of us even seemed to breathe as we surveyed the beast across the no-man's land of white sand. The slitted eyes and yellowed irises of the 7 heads had a demonic hunger, a reptilian coldness. Far behind us, I heard a distant scream still echoing from the auditorium, where Moloch held sway. "Fire!" Mario cried. Instantly, a cacophony of gunshots exploded all around me. I jumped to my feet, scrambling up as the 7-headed dragon leapt forward. Thousands of gallons of salt water streamed down its massive body as it came up on the beach. Long black paws with bone-white talons shot out of the surging ocean, followed by a tapering tail like a water snake's. I brought the rifle up and emptied my magazine as fast as I could, pulling the trigger over and over as I aimed at the many slitted eyes of Leviathan. The bullets seemed to ping harmlessly off its hard obsidian scales, though. It scrambled onto the shore, its heads coming down in a blur, rows and rows of vampiric fangs gleaming dully in each of its mouths. One security agent was bit in half, the spurting stump of its lower body still standing for a long moment, even as the rest of the body disappeared down the throat of the dragon. Mario ran forward, slamming another magazine into his rifle and opening fire point blank. One of the heads came down in a blur towards him. Its great staring eyes exploded in a shower of blue blood and thick viscous fluid. The dragon's head pulled back, its mouth opening in a primal scream of agony. As I reloaded, I scanned the area around me, realizing that nearly half the security guys were either dead or critically injured. I backpedaled away, keeping my eyes on the dragon. It continuously drew forward, killing more of its enemies with every step. I turned and ran for the forest, the sounds of shattering bones and dying men ringing through the air with a sickening clarity behind me. Once I'd reached the borders of the trail, I heard Mario yell, "Retreat!" behind me. By that point, it was too late, though. "Hey, wait up," a voice whispered from behind me. I turned my head, seeing Colomac. Spatters of drying blood covered his face and uniform. As far as I could tell, none of it was his. "Mario's dead. They're all dead. We need to get out of here. We need to get off the island." "How?" "Find the Savior," he answered, panting and out of breath. "We must find him. He can get us out of here." "I don't even know what the guy looks like. He was wearing a goat mask." "You'll know him when you see him. His body is covered in scars, everything except his face. Stay close to me. We need to watch each other's back. It's our only chance of survival." A trail of twisted, broken bodies led from the mansion to the surrounding trails of the beaches. A decapitated woman with a solid gold necklace embedded with diamonds lay in front of me. It was strange on the island, the way oblivion and ineffable wealth coexisted side by side. Everything was deathly silent now, even in the mansion's auditorium. "Where's the Savior?" I asked through gritted teeth. I peeked my head into the auditorium, but nothing moved. Hundreds of smashed and bloodied bodies littered the floor. "He's around here somewhere," Colomac answered. He started circling the mansion, looking for signs of life. Colomac took the lead. As he turned a corner, an enormous black hand with sharp claws of fingers flitted towards us in a blur, wrapping itself around his chest. Colomac gave a strangled cry as it closed around him. I heard the bones crush as a spout of blood and gore flew from his mouth and nose, as if it were a toothpaste tube being squeezed. I backpedaled away as Moloch threw the twitching corpse aside like a discarded toy. It smashed into the wall of the mansion, exploding wetly, a human-shaped, bloody stain languidly dripping down the wall above Colomac's mangled body. Moloch slowly turned his head towards me, the fiery eyes flashing with hunger. He gnashed his fangs together, taking a step forward with legs the size and shape of tree trunks. With every step he took, I felt the ground tremble. "Stop!" I cried, moving away from the monstrous creature. "Why are you doing this?" "There is no why," he gurgled, his voice monstrous and inhumanly slow. "There is only power. The weak deserve to die. Only the strong are worthy of life." I raised my rifle in a last-ditch effort to save myself. Moloch saw it and started running towards me, every step crushing the paved walkway around the mansion into rubble and dust. I aimed for his eyes and nose, emptying the entire magazine as quickly as I could. The bullets smashed into Moloch's face. Dark red clotted blood dripped out of the wounds, writhing with maggots. Drops of it fell around me, landing on my hair and face. I felt the small larva twist all over my skin. Moloch's blood smelled nauseating, like some combination of stink bugs and rotting bodies. He slowed, giving a roar of pain. I turned to run in the opposite direction, but as I looked out in the direction of the beach, my heart dropped. Leviathan was moving in our direction, the giant dragon head looming over the trees. Quickly, it swept towards me, like a dark wind.
"You will suffer for that, worthless slave,"
Moloch growled, wiping blood from his fiery eyes with his sharp talons. A sudden idea came to me. I ran in the direction of Leviathan. Moloch followed closely at my heels, only a few steps behind. Leviathan slithered towards us over the sand and trees, its enormous body undulating like a water snake's. I screamed at it incoherently. Its 7 heads snapped towards me. Its slitted eyes widened as it saw Moloch. I heard the crashing of Moloch's footsteps behind me, only feet away from crushing me into paste. His massive lungs heaved, breath coming quickly, exhaling the odor of sulfur and smoke.
"Leviathan,"
Moloch growled in his demonic voice.
"These are my tributes."
Leviathan's dragon head looked straight up at the sun and screamed in response, their many voices rising and falling in a dissonant wail. As I sprinted into the trees, Leviathan and Moloch ran at each other, colliding with an ear-splitting crash. I glanced back, seeing Moloch ripping one of the dragon's heads off its neck with his sharp fingers. The head screamed as blue blood erupted from the stump. After a moment, the neck fell limply forward. The other dragon heads bit Moloch in a unified attack. They ripped deep holes in his shoulder and arms, snapping over and over like rabid dogs. As the 2 eldritch monstrosities attacked each other in fierce battle, I lost sight of them, but the sounds of fighting echoed over the entire island, crashing like lightning. I felt like the survivor of an apocalypse. I couldn't find a single other living person on the island. Hundreds of crushed, broken, and decapitated bodies surrounded me. Over the cacophony of fighting, I heard a new noise, the whirring of a helicopter nearby. It was coming from the other side of the mansion. Frantically, I sprinted towards the other side, seeing a Black Hawk helicopter getting ready to land. A man in black robes sat in the pilot's seat, his green eyes gleaming as a wide smile spread across his face. I smashed my fist into the door over and over until he opened it. "Holy shit, you're still alive?" he asked. I hadn't seen this man before. He had a face like a Calvin Klein model, all sharp angles and high cheekbones, perfectly proportioned in every way. But his scalp looked melted and scarred, as if someone had thrown gasoline on his hair and ignited it. His eyes were stunted, twisted growths of scar tissue. His hands, too, were covered in deep, folding burn scars. Are you the savior?" I responded quickly. "Please get me out of here." "They call me that," he said wistfully. "The savior, yes, I guess I am. Get in." The savior stared at me with his strange green eyes, the color of swamps where monstrous things swam under the surface. "Some people just need to learn the hard way," he said. The helicopter took off into the dark night, covered with bright twinkling stars. There is no great power without great responsibility, after all. Those of us who seek the Ancient Ones know it comes with a cost. I just stared out the window, gazing down at the countless mutilated bodies that littered the beach. Below us, the face of the bull stared up with eyes of fiery cyclones. The broken, still body of Leviathan lay at its feet. As we made it over the great waters of the Pacific Ocean, the bull god raised its hand and waved. At that moment, I thought I could almost see a hurricane of translucent souls circling around him, spiraling up into the sky. It started with the animals. Hunters noticed populations dwindling rapidly, and inexplicably, in our little patch of the enclave. Rumors spread of deer hobbling around, riddled with tumors that burst from their backs or splitting their faces in two. One was said to have been rendered completely immobile, more tumor than deer. Then the people started disappearing. Homes broken into, signs of a struggle, toppled furniture, painted red with blood, but with no other trace of the families that lived there. The feds cover-up job was as impressive as it was terrifying to see. Seeing how efficiently those men in black worked, the media blackout, the disappearances, the patrols through the night enforcing some unspoken curfew, it made me wonder what else they'd covered up in the past to have become this experienced. But it was a huge pit for all those precious taxpayer dollars, and parents were withdrawing their kids from the program en masse. I couldn't deny it. The integration initiative was falling apart. The headmistress was a shell of a woman, hollowed out, eyes sunken, exhausted. I could only imagine how the feds must be screaming in her ear to get the situation handled, or the truce would be off. I saw her sitting in her office with a glass of scotch, and she hadn't taken a single sip. She was staring into the middle distance.
"What is that phrase you humans use? No good deed goes unpunished?"
Her voice was hoarse and dry.
"Once I pulled down merchant ships into the depths of the Caribbean. Nothing mattered but my own hunger. For centuries, it was a simple life."
She took a swig of her scotch at long last.
"To be a thing of horror was easy. It was to be free and without worries. But now that I've chosen to live like this, to try to be kind, to try to sow peace between our peoples, look what has become of it. What has become of me?"
I finally noticed that she was staring at something, a photo on the wall of that familiar little boy with the dirty blonde hair, Elijah. I wanted to hold her hand and deliver some rousing speech about how doing the right thing was never easy. To be honest, I was thinking the same thing. What the hell was I doing here? I'm not cut out for any of this. I kept telling myself, today's the last day. I'm going to quit for sure. Tomorrow. Then I'd get something like what happened this morning, when Katie walked up to me clutching her favorite little plush butterfly. "You know, Mr. Vermeil, all this stuff with Saladin, it's all been really scary. But you know what? Every time I'm in your classroom, stuff doesn't seem so scary anymore." "Is that so?" "Uh-huh. Every time I'm scared, I just think about what you said to me." She puffed out her chest and lowered her voice, trying her best to imitate me. "Katie, if you ever feel scared or sad, just remember, somebody out there cares about you." Then I smiled, and we gave each other a little fist bump as she ran off. I realized I couldn't quit this place. How could I? I had to walk into class yesterday with a cane, limping with every single step in whatever fashion least aggravated the aching pain in my chest, where multiple shattered ribs had been restored by some arcane process. The tumors left a thick, bulgy ridge of scar tissue along my chest, and my neck was still far longer than it used to be. Looking in the mirror, I realized I barely even looked human. I tried not to think too hard about it. Class had only just barely begun when the headmistress strutted in with a sudden energy to her step, her hands clasped together, and something I never thought I'd see on her face, a big, beaming grin. The kids were just as awed as I was as she replaced me at the head of the class.
"I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Vermeil, but I think you'll agree that the announcement I have for all of you justifies the intrusion."
She cleared her throat.
"My beloved pupils, it is with pleasure that I announce to you that the notorious hunter known as Saladin has finally been brought to justice."
In an instant, the classroom was alive with frantic whispers and sighs of relief, until the headmistress silenced them with a raise of her hand. Even I couldn't believe it. Everything we'd been through, all that suffering and terror, it was all over. It almost seemed anticlimactic. I was so filled with relief, I had to dab my cheek with a napkin to staunch the tears that were threatening to flow. Apparently, the hunter had gotten too overconfident. He tried to take out one of the kids while they were in the process of being withdrawn from the initiative, while surrounded by dozens of agents. Even he couldn't escape their wrath of Uncle Sam, and I almost pitied him for whatever was being done to him in some black site somewhere. The smiles spread through the classroom like a disease, and even I couldn't wipe the grin off my face. Our long shared nightmare was over. Everything would go back to whatever normal meant nowadays. I know it must have been driving you all crazy, being so cooped up inside all this time. So I say we celebrate by getting some fresh air. What do you say? The class answer was unanimous. It wasn't until we were out in the halls that I started getting a weird feeling in the back of my mind. Where were all the security agents? Why did she waltz into my class in particular to announce the news, instead of using the PA system? How could Saladin have made such a stupid mistake? It all came to a head when I realized she was leading us into the access tunnels. Now hold on, wait a minute. I suddenly froze in place. You want us to go in there? Are you sure that's safe? Why not just... Oh, come now, Mr. Vermeil. I'm just leading them to a particularly beautiful mountain view. Don't you think they've earned it? She smiled at me again. I didn't like it. The headmistress never smiled. I felt I couldn't even steal a single gasp of air in those tunnels. My experience there was the most traumatic of my life, and just being in those tight halls made my heart pound. But it wasn't long before we all emerged out of one of the side entrances, dotted seemingly arbitrarily along the mountainside, as if they once connected to chambers, since deemed obsolete. And I must admit, it was beautiful. I savored the sight of the flocks of crows rallying around the long, shimmering beams that was a waterfall peeking out of the cliff face before us, visible even through an impressive mountain fog, and the sound of the metal door slamming shut behind us. I turned to see the headmistress's face pressed against the glass. No, not hers. Someone else's. Someone familiar. It made sense. If he could alter his physiology at will, surely he could imitate that of others. Still, I was dumbstruck. It was all I could do to blather idiotically. I didn't know you could do that. I'm trying new things, Mr. Vermeil. His voice rang clear, even with the metal door between us. You should feel proud, you know. It's not often I run into someone who forces me to innovate. Then, from down the mountainside, came that terrible roar. The gurgles and guttural creaks of something vibrating some great and malformed vocal cords. The crash of trees being knocked over as something tore down the forest path. I only caught glimpses of it beneath us, through the fog, the silhouette of a thing so weighed by mounds and stumps of oozing tissue that it was bent and hunchbacked. It was crawling on hands and knees like a newborn baby. Teratomas, having grown from mere fingernails to entire arms and hands and limbs and faces, which themselves were then consumed by tumors and left swollen with the throbbing spherical stomas of cancer mass. And poking free from that athema to all beauty was that tube-like head, that lamprey maw of teeth longer than our arms and throats that could swallow us all whole. It was heaving and letting out those deep, roaring groans as it pulled itself up the mountainside, transfixed by the promise of prey, like the taste of us was all that could quiet its writhing agony. There were paths from our perch back up to the school proper, but they were steep. It wasn't quite as sheer a climb, but it wasn't far from being one either. I wish I could say that I was the big bad hero who shepherded all the students up the mountainside. In truth, they left me in the dust. Even the average kids were impossibly swift and energetic, and there were no average kids. The class took off up the slope like it was trivial, while I huffed and panted and scrambled up the rocks behind them, realizing all those days I'd skipped the gym would now be the death of me. "Mr. Vermeil, grab my hand!" Suddenly, an arm descended at least 20 feet, lurching out at me from over the cliff face. Billy, I realized. I took his hand, and the grotesque arm retracted like a fishing line, reeling in a catch as it lifted me weightlessly. The school came into view, but that cancerous leviathan had outpaced us. Horror rocked me as I felt the very earth shake as it dug its limbs into the mountainside below us like climbing axes, bile spewing from its esophageal tube as it roared with a ceaseless hunger. We weren't going to make it. It was too vast, too powerful. And there she was before us, the headmistress. Her face was one of grim determination as she faced down the beast pursuing us. She was clad only in gold-seamed robes, and in one easy motion she cast it aside and let it vanish with the wind. For a moment I froze in horror as her skin began to crack and break like a porcelain doll. Then I noticed the tips of tendrils poking out of the cracks, something working its way free from beneath the flesh like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. I remembered that terrible leviathan I had once seen in her shadow. We had just pushed by her when her human form broke apart, and black tendrils as thick as tree stumps tore forth in all directions, as if glad to be finally freed from the prison of flesh and bone. I couldn't tell where it began and ended. I know only that it rivaled the cancer in sheer scale. I tried not to look at her true self, not the disguise she'd been donning. I kept my eyes forward, even as behind us came the great roaring of beasts and the shaking of the earth as the two colossi slammed into one another. I grabbed a shotgun off the corpse of a security agent as we re-entered the school, for all the good that would do me. My students gawked at me in awe. They had never seen me like this. "There's supposed to be a safe room in the west wing. All we can do is wait it out while the headmistress handles that thing. Go, now," I commanded. I followed along as they scrambled down the hall, although I made a detour, scrounging around through the headmistress's office and tucking something beneath my jacket before rejoining the kids. Students from the other classes, seeing the herd, would occasionally emerge from their hiding places and join us. Every child had been packed into the safe room when I heard another voice down the hall. It was Abigail, rushing forth to join us. Wait, Mr. Vermeil, you forgot about me." It was impossible. I'd kept a careful head count of every kid to ensure that none were left behind. In an instant, I raised the shotgun and unloaded it into the face of the thing pretending to be Abigail. "You're not going to fool me twice." The thing bent over backwards from the force of the gunshot to the point that the top of its head rested against the ground behind its feet. Then it sprung instantly back to a standing position, its flesh beginning to twist and meld, the cruel cackle of Saladin emerging from its bullet-shredded lips. "Maybe you really are smarter than I gave you credit for, Vermeil." I slammed the safe room door shut behind me and stood there with the gun pointed at it. The kids all cowered behind me. There was silence for a while, punctuated only by the building shuddering upon its foundation as the leviathans fought outside. Then came a slow, rhythmic tapping on the door. "All I have to do is wait you out, Vermeil. Sooner or later, one of those kids with you is going to get hungry. When they start getting desperate,
You're going to look like a nice, juicy steak."
"Why are you doing this?" I called. "Just for what, the money? I'm sure whatever they're paying you, the feds can quadruple it."
"It's not just about the money. I consider this more of a self-funded hobby. Clearing these creatures off the streets before they even have a chance to grow up and hurt anyone. Now that seems like a much better goal."
Don't act like you have the moral high ground here. Not after what you did to all those people. Feeding them to the cancer just to what? To fuel your little crusade? Was that just collateral damage to you? That seemed to actually tick him off. "Those deaths are on you, not me. You're the one who forced my hand. None of this would have happened if you just leave me alone. They're just children." "They're monsters, Vermeil. Demons in human skin. They're designed to kill and devour people, just like you." "I don't care what they are," I said as I pumped the shotgun. "They're my kids, and I'm not letting you hurt a single one of them." My heroics were interrupted, however, by what felt like a Category 5 earthquake rocking me off my feet. It seemed those titans outside had come crashing into the school amidst their brawl, tendrils and cancer limbs tearing at the very foundation. For a moment, it felt like the entire structure would crumble in on itself, and we'd all be crushed like bugs. It was only by the grace of whatever God may be that only the other wing of the school was destroyed, although some blackened tentacles tore a hole right through the wall of the safe room. Everyone and everything in the room lay in a cluttered heap. When I managed the strength to rise, Saladin was standing over me, that big grin on his face. My students were quivering with fear. I knew that with their strength, if they attacked all at once, they could tear him to pieces, but they were frozen in place, because in the end, human or not, they were just kids. Terrified children faced with a man who wanted to hurt them. They couldn't defend themselves. Someone had to step up and protect them. "Last chance, Vermeil. You've proven yourself competent. I could use someone with your talents." I didn't bother bantering. I raised the shotgun and blew a baseball-sized hole in his chest. Didn't even slow him down, of course. The wound healed almost as quickly as it made. But it did infuriate him, and he came stomping towards me. "Good," I thought. "Get closer. I need you closer." I managed to blow a few more holes in him before he smacked the shotgun out of my hand and curled his fingers around my neck with the other. I gasped and wheezed as he strangled me, lifted off the ground as his grip on my throat tightened. Tears streamed down my face as my vision darkened. "Maybe you aren't that smart after all," he taunted. "What a shame. But maybe things are better this way. After all, you might be happier down there in hell, surrounded by all these demons you gave up your life to protect." Then, the smug grin was wiped off his face by the feeling of something piercing through his chest. With an almost drunken stumble, he looked slowly down to see the Damascene dagger driven right through his heart. I'd snuck into the headmistress's office, tucking it into my jacket, just in case I had the opportunity to end him with his own weapon. His grip relaxed, and I fell to the floor, gasping and wheezing and sucking down fresh air. A black ichor spouted from his heart around the throbbing wound that even he, with his powers of flesh, could not heal. He laid there, staring at the ceiling, laughing to himself as if at the absurdity of it all. "Clever man," he whispered. "Clever, clever." Then the children descended upon him, and the screaming began. I was still flickering in and out of consciousness when the kids crowded around him, concerned looks on their faces. When I finally found the strength to look down at myself, I almost fainted at what I saw. My flesh had been twisted, knotted, calcified upon my chest where I'd hidden the blade beneath my jacket, forming a hard crust of thick flesh that ran down my arm where the blade had merged with my hand. A sort of black sludge oozed through the cracks in the callous flesh like groundwater in the Sahara. It was still changing, evolving, like something was growing upon me. I could tell I was being fundamentally changed, but I couldn't tell how or into what. A couple of students hefted my arms over their shoulders and escorted my limp form through the smoldering wreckage that had once been our school. And in front of the building, surrounded by the mangled flesh that was once cancer, was a creature so immense that she was half veiled in the fog, a half-formed, enormous mass of Stygian flesh and long black tendrils, a single blue eye the size of a building, staring down at me from the darkness. I couldn't help but smile and wave weakly at her. So this is what the headmistress had been hiding under her skin all along. Together, we all watched the school burn, whatever sections still remained, crumbling one by one as the fire smoldered. The children kept watch over me as my body reformed itself, bones and joints cracking and reforming painlessly, but uncomfortably as my figure morphed. Katie sat by my side through it all, watching the fire consume the place she'd spent the happiest years of her short life. "It's not over," she said. "We'll find somewhere new. We'll rebuild, make a new school, far away from here." I frowned at that, imagining them hiding somewhere new and leaving us all behind. But it was for the best. "I'll miss you," I whispered weakly. She tilted her head. "What do you mean, Mr. Vermeil? You're coming with us." My gaze drifted down to my reflection in a shard of broken glass on the pavement. My shifting, smoldering, twisted form. I looked monstrous. I looked unnatural. I looked inhuman. "After all," she said with a smile, "you're one of us now." I know I'm going to sound insane to you, but what has been happening to me has freaked me out for many years. For context, I live in the mountains. The little town that I live in used to have a road going through it, and forest on either side. We used to get a lot of visitors around autumn because of how pretty the little town looked. Autumn was where we got a lot of money for hotels and restaurants. Many townsfolk anticipated autumn, but something sinister also comes with the season that affects our little town. The leopard man. Some people call him the furry man or the fuzzy man. Some people call him the polka dot lion. But the most popular name is the leopard man. Every autumn, he comes through our town and just stares. He doesn't go in any of the houses. He doesn't attack anyone. Some of the townspeople have said that they've gotten real close to him, and they can see that his eyes are bloodshot red. He breathes heavily. He's got the odor of death stuck to him. Many townspeople find him very unsightly, and try to keep the talk of him so low that the tourists can't hear about him. Keep the economy stable, you understand. But every year, he comes down the road, walks through the town, and leaves into the forest. I always thought he was harmless, until I had my first and final interaction with him. I was about 6, I guess. Wasn't very helpful to either of my parents. Loved to play outside, and when I couldn't, I threw a big hissy fit about it. I usually played in the front yard with my favorite soccer ball. I absolutely loved that ball. But one day, I accidentally kicked it into the forest. I didn't mean to, and I went to ask my parents if I could go get it. They said no, and when I suggested that maybe me or my mom or me or my dad could walk to the other side of the street and into the woods to get it, they still said no. I was pretty sad, cried my eyes out all day. I was a mess when I went to bed, and I was still really sad. Couldn't go to sleep. I kept thinking about it, just staring through the window, hoping I could sneak out before my parents would catch me. But then he came and stared through the window. The leopard man is a danger and shouldn't be messed with. I freaked out and ran to the corner of my room, trying to shield my eyes from him. He gestured that I should open the window, but I was too scared. Then the leopard man held something up. My soccer ball. It was deflated, but I didn't care. The leopard man had it, and I wanted it back. He gestured again that I should open the window, and this time I did. I cracked it, just a little bit. I was still really scared of him, and he smelt foul.
Well, well, well. I believe this is yours, said the leopard man, holding up the deflated soccer ball.
Yeah, that's mine. How'd you find it? I said, prying the window just a little bit more open.
Well, I've been observing you, and I know just how deeply you care about that ball. When you kicked it into the forest and couldn't get it back, I felt sad for you, so I trekked through the woods and found it, and I'm now giving it back to you. It's ruined. It has a big hole in it. I can't play with it anymore, I said, looking disappointed. Don't be sad. Here, if you come out of the house, me and you can trek to the fixie-uppy house, and we can get it fixed in no time. I thought about it, but shook my head. You're a stranger. I don't even know who you are. And how do you know where I live? Well, I work with the Tooth Fairy, and together we know all the names of the boys and girls around the globe. I know your name's William. I know who your mommy and daddy are. Would I really be a stranger if I knew what your name was? I thought about it. It was true. Strangers don't know the names of little boys and girls, or who their parents are. I guess not, I said. See, I'm not a stranger. I'm your friend, and friends help each other. That's what I'm trying to do for you. So if you crawl out the window, me and you can meet all my friends, and the fairies living in the forest, too, said the leopard man. I was hooked. I wanted to meet all his friends, and I wanted to get my soccer ball back. So I pried the window up and crawled through it. One thing that I didn't notice was that the leopard man was big. He had been less big than my dad. My dad's about 6'2", and he squeezed my hand so hard that I was afraid he was going to break it. As we walked, I could tell that he was breathing really hard, and all he talked about was how he couldn't wait for me to see his friends at the house. We walked for quite a while, and we finally came to a clearing where I saw a house. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. The roof was caving in, the windows were broken, and all you could see was darkness. Is this your house? I asked. Yes. Doesn't it look so fun? Said the leopard man. I didn't think so. I want to go home. This is scary, I said, trying to yank my hand back. No, you're not going anywhere now. This is your home forever. You're going to meet all my wonderful friends, the leopard man said. He pulled me into the house, and I smelled something really bad. Tried to cover my mouth and nose from the smell, but I was trying very hard not to cry, too. The inside of the house wasn't much better than the outside. The floors, the walls, they were all decaying. The man led me to the basement, and the smell was absolutely horrible. He gripped onto my hand even tighter, and I kept telling him that he was hurting my hand, but he just kept walking down the stairs, breathing hard. When we got to the bottom, all my eyes could make out were shelves lining the walls with round things on them. The leopard man told me to sit, and he went to turn on the basement light. As he did, he said, "I'm so excited that you can finally see my friends, William." The light turned on. The light allowed me to see what was in the room, and I screamed. The round things were heads, and they were
on every shelf with labels over them. In the middle of the room, there was a pole with flesh on it. A pole going horizontal across. It was as if two poles were making a cross. I screamed and ran up the stairs. I looked back and I could see the leopard man running behind me, trying to grab my clothes and pull me back down. I ran out through one of the doors and into the forest. I didn't know where to go, so I hid in some brush. I couldn't go to sleep. I was too scared, and all night long I heard screaming and running. He was trying to get to me, and I tried to hold my crying until morning. I survived the night and eventually made it back to my house early in the morning. My parents didn't even notice I was out. Frankly, I was too scared to tell them I had snuck out. I told no one my experience, and frankly, I would keep it a secret for the rest of my life if it wasn't for the news story. They found the house. Turns out the leopard man was just some creep. He liked messing with kids and cutting off their heads, displaying them on shelves as his sick trophies. He was insane. He stuck all their organs into a cross to worship the one who shall live forever, whatever that means. I'm scared, but I'm bringing the story to you so no one has to live through the hell like I did. Screw that leopard man. Screw whoever still relates to him. He can die in hell for all I care. This is a warning. Don't take things that aren't yours. My mistake as a teenager ruined my life. At the age of 16, I moved into a new house with my family, since my father was offered a new job that paid him much more than what we'd been making before. We'd been in poverty for years, so when the pipeline company called him, he instantly accepted. 2 weeks later, we moved from my hometown in Georgia. I'll admit, it was really difficult saying goodbye to my friends. I basically grew up with these guys since birth. My mom assured me that it was better this way, so I finally loaded my belongings into the moving truck. Our new home was about 2 hours away from our original location, so this meant I'd have to get used to a new remote place. I teared up as I saw the town's greeting sign, "Welcome to Clamville, where memories are made." How ironic. I never knew this place would be my first week in hell. I knew then I'd miss my original home every day. The hometown was all I'd ever known. All I could see was nothing but dirt roads and old homes. Felt like a ghost town. But hey, what did I know? Maybe I'd love the place. My poor, naive self. The house we moved into wasn't much to look at. The outside was painted crimson, with a black roof and a black door to match. The inside had 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and everything a house would normally have. A few days after living there, I realized we had an attic because of a chain hanging from the washroom. Me, being excited, I immediately told my mom. I was always curious in my youth. She tilted her head in confusion and said the owner never mentioned it. My father always had a ladder because of his previous job with the logging company. So we searched the truck and found it in the back. My dad had taken the pipeline work vehicle that day, so it was never unusual for his beat-up red truck to be in the driveway. My mom set up the ladder, began to walk on it, but then stopped halfway from pulling the chain. "Ma, what are you doing? Pull it down so we can see what's up there." "I don't feel like this is safe. The previous homeowner obviously didn't tell us for a reason. Maybe it has some safety hazards. He might have left old things up there, like antiques or something." She inhaled deeply and let out a long sigh. "Fine, but if you get hurt, you'll never be allowed up there again. I mean it," she said sternly as she walked back from the ladder. In my excitement, I rushed and pulled the rusty chain so that the entrance was fully exposed. A cloud of faintly gray dust hit me in the face and I coughed. My mother complained about the mess, but that was the least of my worries. I climbed myself the rest of the way in. The atmosphere feeling eerie. See anything? My mother hollowed. Ma, I haven't even turned on the light yet, I said. I felt around the attic and flicked a light switch. The attic lighting up. The floral wallpaper in the room was peeling off, and the floor was in need of sweeping. Other than that, it seemed in fairly good condition. In my surprise, much less was there, besides a few boxes and porcelain plates, teacups, and occasionally old frilly dresses in piles on the floor. Everything was caked in dust. From the look of it, no one had been up here in years. My mother yelled again, and it caused me to jump. "Everything okay?" she said. "Yeah, Ma, I promise. There isn't much up here," I yelled back, with a slight tone of annoyance. She always worried way too much. I paced up and down the floor to examine my findings, and that's when I saw it in the corner. A beautiful, antique mirror with bright gold edges. It resembled a magic mirror from one of those cheesy Disney movies I loved as a little girl. I grabbed it immediately and just couldn't stop myself. It wasn't mine, but I needed it. Its looks lured me in. I admired the gold and beautiful shape. I wanted it. The owner left it, so it was technically mine, right? It was the size of my torso, but it was pretty easy to carry. I grabbed the mirror, turned off the light, and with caution, I headed back down the ladder while clinging to it. Mother met me at the last step. "What's that?" "It's an old mirror. It's beautiful. I really want to put it in my new room," I said with joy. She examined it. "Needs some cleaning, but sure, I guess so. Just remember, we don't know whose it is," she said. Soon as my mother finished her sentence, I squealed with excitement, even in my teen years. The littlest things brought me happiness, as if I was 4 again. "I told you there was at least something up there, Ma." I ran off to find some Windex to clean it up. As I was grabbing the cleaner from under the sink, I felt an extremely cold presence behind me. I wrote it off as the house was old and probably needed some insulation work done. I headed to the kitchen table and began scrubbing the glass. The smudges weren't coming up. I began to get aggravated and used different cleaning chemicals, dishwashing soap, Windex, vinegar, Ajax, even baby wipes. It refused to come up from the glass, and my excitement faded slightly. I went to my mother's bedroom to go find her and ask her for more solutions. "Ma, these fingerprints won't come up," I said, defeated. "Well, it is really old, honey. Could be stained from the inside out," she explained, looking up from her book. She was always seen with some kind of novel in her hand. I sighed. "Well, should I just hang it up as is?" "I don't see why not. It's clean now." "All right, then." I closed the door a little. I felt my gut twist as I turned the knob to my own room. Little did I know then it was my subconscious warning me of what was to come. I headed to my room and decided to hang it up over my bed. I sat on the end of my mattress and admired it once more. Even though it had a few smudges, it was still gleaming and shiny. I loved it. I even looked at it as I fell asleep that night. To my dismay, I had my first nightmare of a cryptid crawling out of the wall and grabbing my throat. The hands burned as soon as they touched my skin. I couldn't scream. I was paralyzed. The figure was cloudy gray and had such dark eyes. As its eyes met mine, I finally woke up in a panic. The smell of the thing is forever burned into my nose. I was covered in sweat and my hair was matted against my face. I went to the bathroom and immediately took a hot shower. I always hated how sweat felt. I didn't go back to bed that night. I stayed up and drew in my sketchbook the whole time. I didn't want to ever have that nightmare again. I thought it would pass. I even prayed it would. I checked my dimly lit computer screen and saw it was 8 a.m. I got up and made myself some fried eggs. Mom woke up from the smell and sleepily walked into the kitchen. "You're up early," she yawned. "Yeah, I was hungry." I decided not to tell her about the nightmare. Knowing her, she'd blame it on the YouTube videos I watch. The eggs were done, and I grabbed 2 plates. "Is Dad already gone? I didn't hear him leave." Yeah, you know how his job is. I miss him. I know. I do too. We ate at the kitchen table without saying a word to each other. The move was impacting us both. Dad came home at 11 that night, and, as always, he left at 7 in the morning while I was asleep. He had weekends off, but when he had spare time, he'd usually rest since the job was hard on his back. I knew I'd been enrolled in a new high school in a few months after the summer was over, and I was scared to leave Mom all alone. She didn't do well when she was stir-crazy. The next few days felt like a fever dream. I spent less and less time in my room. As a teenager, that's never a bad thing, but I noticed any time I was in there, I'd catch myself zoning out, looking at the mirror. I kept having the same nightmare. It was repetitive nightly, and it began to drive me crazy. I was desperate enough to begin asking for help on Reddit, Discord, online chat rooms, you name it. They all asked me a reoccurring question: do you have any mirrors in your room? At the time, I thought it was stupid, an irrelevant question. I eventually sent someone a picture of it in private chat, and they told me I needed to burn it, and began rambling about negative attraction. I nervously laughed at the text. Burn a mirror? That sounded ridiculous. I laughed to myself and picked up the gorgeous mirror from my light brown wall. I gazed at it to see if this person was truly crazy, and that's when it hit me. The smudges look like they're on the inside. I was in shock. I had so many questions running through my head. There was no way fingerprints could be inside the mirror, right? I kept reassuring my mind and told myself I was overthinking it. I surely had to be paranoid from the lack of sleep. I went to bed, and the dream repeated itself once again. The thing completely devouring me. I woke up. I had enough and cracked. I told my mom everything. She didn't believe a word I said. Though, in her defense, she never was one to believe in negative energy or anything paranormal. Her denying it had anything to do with ghosts or kind of eased my fears. Though the nightmares continued, I was finally able to get more sleep. I became numb to it, and as I knew it would happen again. One night in particular, I awoke from the same dream, and my throat was dry, as if it was caked with flour. I brushed my teeth to get the sensation off my tongue and spit out pure black. I opened my mouth wide enough to see every tooth, and that's when I saw it. To my horror, my mouth had a thin layer of dust on the top of my gums. The people warning me were right. It had to be evil. I rinsed out my mouth and cried in the bathroom floor for what felt like hours. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Mom kept denying my claims, and Dad was never home to give me comfort. I picked myself up and decided then and there I had to get rid of the mirror. I was going to smash it into a million pieces. Its gorgeous petite shape was a wolf in sheep's clothing. I sat in the living room, watching old Looney Tunes reruns until I fell asleep. Not long enough to have the dream, of course, because I woke up to the sound of someone coming into the kitchen. It was my dad. I stood up from the couch. "Can I get a hug before you go to work?" "You know I never deny one of my hugs, kiddo, but why don't you sleep on the couch?" he said, as he wrapped me in a bear hug. I smelled the Old Spice on his clothes. I haven't had one of those embraces since we moved. I always adored my dad growing up. I ignored his question about why I was sleeping in the living room. "Have a good day at work." I was just tired. I didn't want him to worry or feel like it was his fault. He was trying his best for us. I knew that. "Thanks, kid," he said with a smile. He then walked out the front door. I'm glad I finally saw his face. It felt like ages. It was one of those moments I wished he had his old job again. Then I remembered all the times he had no money, no food, no water. It was better this way, I kept telling myself. I finally walked back to my bedroom and Seeing the old mirror flooded me with rage. I grabbed the damn thing off the wall. I walked out into the front yard and smashed it. Picked it up and smashed it again, throwing it onto the gravel. I hated it. I hated how it looked, the pain it caused me, the nightmares it brought. I beat it until it was just gold lining. I left it on the dirty ground. I just stared at it. I knew I'd have a lot of explaining to do once Mom found out. In that split moment, I felt a weight being lifted off my shoulders. It was over. I could be joyous again and enjoy my new home with my mom. With relief, I walked back into the living room. Examining my hands, I found that there was a glass shard, so I brought myself to the sink and washed my hands. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the bedroom, my one and only sanctuary. But there it was again, the mirror, back in its original position on the wall. I couldn't believe it. I ran back outside and saw that even the shards of glass from the grass were gone. Since that day, it's followed me everywhere, along with the nightmares. Every house I've moved to since adulthood, it's been there, despite me purposefully leaving it. I regret finding it so beautiful and wanting it to be mine. I just can't escape it. Growing up since that, my mother never believed me when I'd cry to her about the beautiful thing. It was hard making friends in my new town because I was scared of having anyone over to the house. I feared the mirror would follow them too. I stayed to myself and would look for any reason to stay away from home. I believed this dreaded curse may follow me past death. The worst part of this existence is the feeling of pure insanity. Everyone telling me I'm crazy. I live every day wondering if I've lost my mind. It tortures me mentally, and I feel so alone. All I have now is my reflection in that mirror. So take my warning and remember, curiosity killed the cat. I think I was about 6 years old when I started to notice something felt unusual about our family home. My parents told me we had moved here when I was a baby, so it's been the only place I really call home, but it never quite felt right. I would go to friends' houses after school or at weekends for birthday parties, and the atmosphere just felt so different in comparison to when I was home. There hung an air of what I would describe as oppressive malevolence in our home, but as a child, it felt like fear, and I remember trying to articulate this cloying, crushing, almost sinister presence to my parents all those years ago, but it was casually disregarded as an overstimulated child's imagination. As I grew older, I felt a greater sense of unease at home and found myself staying with friends, doing whatever I could to prolong my time away before I had to come back. The feeling of anxiety and paranoia would rise back to the surface the closer I got to home. You see, it felt like I was being watched, like there was something in the home monitoring my every action. This wasn't an, oh, my parents could walk in at any moment, teenage level of paranoia either. No, this was hair standing on end, goosebumps, fight or flight instincts kicking into overdrive, as if my body and mind were sounding the alarm to get out, to run, but after searching every room on several occasions, there was never anything out of place. I continued to raise my concerns to my parents, but it fell on deaf ears. They chalked it up to acting out as a typical teenager would. They had bigger issues, as I could see the cracks starting to form in their marriage, eventually becoming all-encompassing as arguments ruptured around the house and their relationship began to crumble. All the while, the pressing feeling of malevolence continued to hang in the air. As time went on, their relationship completely broke apart. My mom had become a recluse, quit her job, and spent most days locked away in the spare room, only emerging to get food, with barely an acknowledgement to me or my father's existence. My father had become bitter and distant, a hollow shell of his former self. except for the infrequent outbursts of emotion, swaying from anger to desperate pleading whenever he and my mother crossed paths in the kitchen. The strange thing is, during this time, the home felt almost normal. The dread and paranoia I'd felt before had almost disappeared, but had been replaced by the anguish that comes from being in the middle of a family that's falling apart. It didn't last long, though, as my mother stopped emerging from the spare bedroom entirely, and the silence in the house was frequently punctuated by the thunderous knocks of my father's fist on the spare bedroom door, followed by his pleas to my mother to come out and eat, then the sorrowful sobbing of a broken man heading back to his room. I hated it. I hated being in the middle of it all and seeing the people I loved, my parents, my world, crumbling around me. All the while, I wasn't even pinging on their radar. I felt invisible. In such a short space of time, my father had become completely dissident, barely registering my presence despite my protests. My mother hadn't been seen for days, and he had come knocking on her door. I tried knocking myself, pleading with her to come out and eat, but it was met with silence each time. After several attempts, after multiple days, my father screamed at me to just leave her alone. A week had passed, and it felt like time had come to a standstill in the house. My father stopped going to work, and like my mother, he started to confine himself to the bedroom. The air felt stagnant. The silence was suffocating. I spent a long time out of the house, seeking solace in my friends and their families, too ashamed to admit what was going on at home, diverting questions over lunch to other topics of conversation. I wasn't prepared for the 8th day. I woke up in the middle of the night and immediately felt it, the rising dread, the pervasive feeling of being watched. My throat tightened, my pulse began to quicken as the fear grasped my mind in an iron vice. I felt like I was 6 again, unable to truly convey and comprehend the internal terror I was going through. My fight-or-flight instinct screamed at me. I tried to force the feelings back and put my pillow over my head, but my mind was racing, and the surging feeling that something sinister didn't want me to sleep was destroying any chances of me getting rest. I decided to get up and see if going outside would help clear my mind. It was only after I climbed out of bed and my eyes had adjusted to the darkness that I noticed the smell. There was a rancid, foul stench in the air, like rotting food left out in the sun to fester in the heat. I accidentally took a breath and the smell clung in my throat, causing me to cough and retch in disgust. I grabbed a nearby shirt and put it over my mouth and nose to act like a mask, but it was of minimal effect against the invasive stench. I went into the hallway to see if I could try to figure out the source of the foul odor and noticed the doors to both spare room and my parents' room were open. I yelled my parents' names into the darkness, but was met with silence, so I cautiously walked down the hallway to the spare room, first to see if my mother was still there, and simply was in a deep sleep. As I got closer to the room, my hair began to stand on end as the feeling of dread became more and more intense. I reached the doorway, peering into the darkness, and was hit with an even more intense odor. Rotten food. No. Rotten flesh. I reached for the light switch, fumbling in the darkness to find it, half choking on the smell which was seeping through my makeshift mask. I managed to find the switch, and the room was bathed in light, illuminating the true horror before me. My mother, was in the wall. Her body had become fused with the wall of the house, contorted and crumpled as if she were slowly being devoured. Her face and what remained of her limbs could be seen protruding, gaunt, pale, her cheeks sunken, her eyes hollow, as if the moisture had been drawn out of her face. Her face held an expression of pure anguish, misshapen, stretched into a ghastly visage, violently screaming without sound. Tears clouded my view as I fell back into the hallway, and a wave of nausea hit me. My mind, I couldn't comprehend the horror I just saw. That was my mom, who only a few days ago had been fine, but now... I righted myself, pushing back my unraveling thoughts, and tried to regain my composure. Whatever happened here was not natural, and the being or entity that caused it may still be present. A chill ran down my spine as the next thought slipped into my mind. Father. My dad. I turned around and walked further down the hallway to my parents' bedroom and was met with the same disgusting smell. My heart sank as I reached for the light switch. He was on the floor, but only half his body was visible, for anything below his waist was scattered in the walls. I looked up to the ceiling and saw viscera, rotten flesh, poking out of the cracks above. What was once a magnolia room was covered in dark red and brown stains, with scraps of flesh and shards of bone poking out of the walls. His neck was craned at an inhuman angle, forcing his head to look towards the ceiling, and like my mother, he was holding an expression of pure contorted agony. My mind was on the brink of collapse. I turned to leave the room when I saw he had one outstretched arm, which appeared to be pointing to something on the wall. I looked over from the doorway, paralyzed with fear and unable to convince my body to move closer, but I managed to make out what looked like a message scratched into the floor under his bloody fingernails. Burn it all before it feeds. I didn't have to be told twice. Adrenaline surged through my body, shaking me free from the shackles of fear and driving me into action. I rushed back out to the hallway and headed downstairs to the kitchen. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the air felt heavy and the feeling of being watched became even more pervasive. My heart was racing. I could swear I could see the walls rippling and undulating, but each time my eyes tried to focus on a particular point, all I could see was darkness. Felt like whatever this entity was, it was becoming aware of my plans, and as I reached the kitchen, my body started to slow down. I was feeling drained, emotionally and physically, my mind crumpling under the stress and all I had seen. My body fighting back the waves of nausea and the cycles of adrenaline surging and dumping, causing my muscles to cramp. Through my addled mind, it was starting to make sense. Whatever this thing was, it influenced and fed on emotions, breaking people down enough to feed on them physically, and I was running out of energy and time. I took advantage of another wave of adrenaline and ran to the kitchen drawer, frantically fumbling in the dark until my hands clasped the round box of matches. I struck several matches, setting fire to the curtains above the kitchen sink. The flames began to slowly crawl up the curtains and spread to the nearby cabinet on the wall. A blood-curdling shriek reverberated around the house as the flames started to engulf the walls and smoke pumped across the kitchen ceiling. The walls started to pulsate violently, and I could hear the foundation cracking and feel it rumbling beneath my feet. The shriek kicked my fight-or-flight response into full gear, and I ran out the kitchen into the main hall towards the door. The walls shook more violently the closer I got to that door, and the mix of smoke and rancid, rotten flesh caught in my throat, making me almost vomit. I managed to compose myself as I reached the front door. My hand was on the handle when I heard a voice from behind me.
"Where are you going, my love? It's late. Your father needs you."
My mind nearly faltered, but I pushed the door open and ran outside to hear a scream of anger erupt from the house. Whatever this being was, it wanted me to stay, to perish with it, but I ran down the street and didn't look back. My life as I knew it was over, and I had to start again somewhere new. After all, who would believe me if I told them what had happened that night? I still get nightmares about what happened several years later. I looked online at the local newspaper, and it was determined to be a horrible accident. A tragic house fire killed a family of 3 with no suspicion of foul play. The emergency services who attended the scene didn't recall all the bones and bodies, but they chalked it up to the remains being scattered and buried in the debris as the house collapsed in the fire. The reason I've wrote all this is to serve as a warning. If you ever visit somewhere and you don't feel right, like someone's watching you, and your brain and your body are screaming, telling you to run, listen before it's too late.